Well, like most people in the English-speaking world, the last couple of years, I've been watching episodes of The Crown, which is this marvelously, produced and photographed and acted story of Queen Elizabeth II. It's about, of course, the political and cultural situation of her time. But what's kind of surprised me in a very happy way is the amount of religion in the series. They look with some, I'd say, sympathy and seriousness at religious themes. So in season 1, there was a lot about sometimes the conflicts between Elizabeth's formal role as head of the Church of England and then her family, relationships. There also, I think it was in season 2, there was a great episode about Billy Graham's visit to England. And a lot of the royal family were, looking at him as kind of this backwoods preacher. But Elizabeth liked him and responded very much and invited him to preach, to the royal family. And you could tell in that episode that she was sincerely connecting with him because of her Christian faith. Well, in season 3, I started watching it just recently, I was again struck by the prominence of the theme of religion. Most strikingly, in regard to the character that I think is maybe, of all the secondary characters in the whole series, the most interesting. I'm talking about Princess Alice, who is the mother of Prince Philip. And I must say, before I watched The Crown, I knew nothing about this woman, but she deserves her own miniseries, this character, because Princess Alice was, first of all, an heiress related to almost all the royal families of Europe. She was seen as kind of a psychologically troubled young woman, maybe schizophrenic. She was something of a mystic. And toward the end of her life, she becomes a Greek Orthodox nun who's caring for the poor in Athens. So as this one episode opens up, we see her doing that work, but then there's political unrest in Greece. And so she's spirited away to live in Buckingham Palace with her son and with the royal family. Well, there she is, sort of confounding and or intriguing everyone around her as she's wearing her religious habit. She's engaging in prayer. She seems to be something of a mystic. Anyway, in a remarkable scene, Philip comes to see her, and it appears as though they hadn't seen each other for quite some time. So as they're talking, the mother inquires about his life, and Prince Philip says this and that. And then she says, "You have to find faith." He looks at her kind of, quizzically, and then she says, "It really helps." But then immediately she realizes how inadequate that characterization was, because she says, "No, it doesn't just help. It's everything." And I love that scene. I love that line, because that expresses the nature of authentic religious faith. It's everything in your life, or it's a waste of time. I mean, even though the etiquette of our epic of history tends to say, look, your faith is, one private interest among others. It's like a hobby. She knew, like all the great religious teachers, it's everything, or you're wasting your time. Well, this answer clearly gets into the psyche of Prince Philip, but you can tell he's still fairly puzzled by what she meant. Okay, now fast forward, so I think it's 2 episodes later, or a couple years later, it's 1969, and Princess Alice has just died. And Prince Philip finds himself in a kind of midlife funk. He's bored, he's depressed, nothing in his royal life seems to interest him very much. He's hostile even to religion. So he has to go with the Queen to these religious ceremonies, but he has so little interest in it. But at the same time he's going through this kind of funk, he's also intrigued by the Apollo 11 mission. So it's the summer of 1969. You've got Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins making their heroic way to the moon. And Prince Philip, who's a pilot himself, that's his background, is watching with utter fascination this thing unfold. And what's occurring to him is, these are the greatest men of our time, full of scientific ingenuity, full of courage, full of brio and get up and go. And somehow he thinks, if I can associate myself with them, maybe I'll get out of this funk that I'm in. Right? Well, right at this moment, practically, Philip is invited to visit with a group of Anglican clergymen who are going through a very difficult time, who are experiencing burnout and depression, right, in their ministry. And they're in a kind of therapy setting. And Philip joins their circle of conversation for a bit. And he listens to their kind of tales of woe as they speak of their depression and losing their way and all this. And he's just impatient with them, you know. And he says, listen, what you all need to do is stop all this silly introspection and stop feeling sorry for yourselves. And you should be like, and he says, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. You should be like these heroic lunar astronauts and get up and do something and accomplish something. And they look at him with a kind of, you know, incomprehension, at which point he gets up and in a sort of huff of condescension, he leaves the room. And so it was a moment of, I'll give it a theological term, a sheer Pelagianism. I'm referring there to the idea made popular by Pelagius back in the 5th century, that, you know, salvation is a matter of get up and go. It's a matter of willpower. You can do it. Just, you know, choose good, avoid evil, and get going and accomplish salvation. Philip gives a perfectly Pelagian address. Okay. Now they've made it to the moon, the great Apollo astronauts. They're back on Earth and they're doing their triumphant tour of the world. And they come to London and they're invited to Buckingham Palace to a reception. Philip asks for a private meeting with them. He thinks, okay, these are my heroes, these great men. And I want to meet with them, you know, kind of pilot to pilot. And I want to talk to them. So he does. But he says to them, you know, I'm not interested in the technicalities of the flight. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in, he said, is meaning. What happened to you when you were on the moon? You know, what vision did you have? He's looking for the answer to the big questions, right? And with that, these three very young men, and you know, I remember I was a little kid during that time, and you know, the Apollo astronauts, these great superhuman, you know, figures. But then you remember, gosh, they were like around 30 or high 20s. They were these young men. And there they were, and they said to the prince basically, you know, we were so busy running this mission, we never really thought about those things. I never had time to muse about, you know, the meaning of it all. And then with that, they eagerly, with kind of boyish enthusiasm, launch into all kinds of questions about what's it like in Buckingham Palace, and is it true you got someone with bagpipes wakes you up, you know, in the morning, and Philip, it's beautifully acted, that scene, because you can see something gave way in him. That at that moment something shifted, and he realized, you know, maybe heroic activity, maybe heroic accomplishment, as great as it is, and he admired these young guys, but he also realized that's not going to give me the answer I'm looking for. Now we make a transition from that, and we see Philip now back in the circle with these suffering clergymen. And he delivers himself, for my money, the most beautiful speech in the whole series, is he lays out for them kind of what I've been describing. And then he apologizes to them for the terrible way he treated them. And he says, I admit this now with humility, that I need help. I need your help. And it was a marvelous moment because it's so much more than just interesting psychological development. And God bless the producers and writers of The Crown for seeing this. He was standing on one of the great fault lines of Christianity. And I mentioned Pelagius now a few minutes ago. Is salvation a matter of our heroic accomplishment, or is it primarily a matter of accepting grace? Well, at the very end of his life, the great St. Augustine took on Pelagius. He realized if Pelagius is right, then Christianity is going to fall. Because Christianity, this great biblical religion, is not a religion of heroic self-assertion. It's a religion of grace. God's love, listen now, accepted at the limit of all of our accomplishment. So we're not denigrating accomplishment. I'm all in favor of it. I love accomplishment at all levels. But at the limit of what we can possibly accomplish, there's an openness, there's a surrender to grace, the breakthrough of the divine love. When I realize, as Philip does in that beautiful episode, when I realize I can't save myself, my heroic accomplishment is not going to answer the big questions. At that moment when I say, help, help, that's when I tend to be open to the inrushing of grace. It's been said, I think correctly, that the central teaching of the Bible is this teaching of the primacy of grace. The primacy of grace. God's love comes first. When that's accepted in humility, then off you go. Cooperate with it. Sure, I'm a Catholic. I believe in cooperating with grace, of course. But we have to hold off Pelagianism if we're going to enter into the dynamics of authentic salvation. I think this was remarkably well told in this episode of The Crown in a very surprising way. And it remains, despite the hostility to religion, which is, God knows, on display in our culture today, but this lesson remains of central importance. And again, God bless the makers of The Crown for seeing that and for presenting it so well.